So today, if we're asked to picture the future of work, we may imagine it like this. Green jobs. Or this. 0 hours contracts. Or perhaps robots at our laptops. Hopefully not this, because being unemployed, as you know, is a full-time job. And certainly, we hope to avoid this. The thing is, nearly a century ago, when millions of people were being thrown out of work during the Great Depression, the economist John Maynard Keynes envisioned a future of mostly automated leisure. 15-hour weeks, that's all we were going to have. In his economic prospects for our grandchildren, he suggested that the great problem of the future would be too much free time. Can you believe it? The question then would be what to do with it. So fast forward to 2021, and Keynes's vision seems absurd to us. Work in all areas has never been more all-consuming than it is now. And there have been longer hours for those lucky enough to have stable employment, and an epidemic of underemployment and the scramble of the gig economy for those who are not so lucky. And behind both of those groups, of course, there's a huge pool of global workers who don't even belong to the waged economy at all. Instead, they're part of the so-called informal economy, or what some people call wageless life. So, a deep-seated labor crisis seems pretty self-evident, and it long predates the pandemic. Precarious employment is on the rise, and some have pointed out that this is not due to the robots taking over anytime soon, but it remains the case that there's a global long-term trend towards lower demands for waged work. And the source of this shrinking demand isn't cyclical, it's not the ups and downs of the business cycle, nor is it episodic, as in last year's COVID crisis. It's systemic. That is, growth rates have been falling for decades now, outside of a few headline cases like China, and they may go that way as well. And the model of stable, permanent employment is largely seen to be a thing of the past. Sorry about this, guys. So, what does all of this talk about the future of work have to do with the planetary environmental crisis? As our man David Graeber here notes, we seem to be facing two insoluble problems. On the one hand, we are swimming in debt. Global debt crises pile up to the point of unsustainability. On the other, we have this ecological crisis, as you know, a galloping process of climate change threatening all of the horsemen of the apocalypse. And the two might seem unrelated, but ultimately they're the same. How are they the same? Well, think about it. Endless debt requires endless production in order to service that debt. And endless debt and production means endless growth. And endless growth is just another name for the planetary cancer of hyperdevelopment, resource extraction, and unsustainable fossil fuel combustion. That's what's threatening our biospheric survival. So we could say that the model of work that we've inherited and the model of our relation to the rest of nature has a common root, and it maybe has a common future as well. So one way to think about this connection between work on the one hand and the environment on the other, is to look more closely at a problem, the problem of energy. Since the source of the most urgent crisis that we're facing is fossil fuel combustion, the catastrophic rise in global temperatures that result from pumping CO2 into the atmosphere, it seems obvious that energy should be at the front line of our efforts to stop this. But let's step back. What is energy anyway? We might assume that it's a timeless idea. You know, it's part of the laws of physics. And if you have any sort of traumatic flashbacks, PTSD from physics class, it's probably includes the second law of thermodynamics, which you may know by heart. Entropy increases. But energy really is a term that has a history. It only dates back as a singular concept to the mid-19th century. And that's when the formulation of the laws of thermodynamics began to unify all the different kinds of work and heat and power that you could think of: kinetic, electric, thermal, and so forth. And it's notable that this happened at precisely the time when the need for energy was being recognized as fundamental for the takeoff of capitalist enterprise. So calculating units of energy, as in the kilowatt hours on your monthly utility bill, this was a central feature of the machine revolution that was remaking the landscapes of Britain first and then the world. At the same time, energy became not just a scientific, but also an economic and even a moral category. It linked the desirability of measured work as an expenditure of human energy to the other kinds of energy we might think of. And as the historian Kara Daggett notes, this has tended to focus on a kind of worship of the value of productivity, endless productivity, and the innate moral dignity of waged work. So this new emphasis on energy as a source of profit and work as a source of virtue combined to form what Daggett calls this energy-work nexus. And that really became the rationale for so many of the features of industrial capitalism we might think of: driving workers from the countryside into the factory cities and extending the reach of colonial empires to all four corners of the earth, and inventing new sciences like economics, which needed to come on stream to rationalize the processes of production and finance and distribution. So it's important to identify a single logic that links the need for cheap labor in the pursuit of profit and the hunt for cheap energy to power that profit seeking, and the championing of waged work as the quid pro quo of earning a living, or even a right to live. So what this suggests, and here I want to try and be challenging because I want to get to the bottom of why we're facing this climate crisis. What this suggests is that a response to the climate crisis that just limits itself to finding a pathway to a fossil-free future is not just insufficient, it really risks entrenching the logic that led us to the crisis in the first place. And a future of work, however we might imagine it, that depends on increasing productivity, except now somehow it's going to be green, will not only fail to address the source of our environmental ills, it will actually deepen them. So already, for example, it's become apparent that the tremendous appetite for minerals such as lithium and cobalt and copper and rare earths in countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo has become intensified and has immiserated the labor conditions there, as well as, of course, destroying the environment. Any expansion in the exploitation of these resources means simultaneously the accumulation of poisonous wastes, which have to be cleaned up by the salvage workers and trash pickers of the world's poor, if not absorbed by them, and ultimately, of course, by the earth itself. Now, historically, in the global north, the demand for jobs on the one hand and the demand for a cleaner use of energy on the other have been seen as opposing demands. You know, you either save the dirty jobs and sacrifice the environment, or you save the environment at the sacrifice of workers' livelihoods. But the promise of the Green New Deal, which we've all heard a lot about in recent years, is that these demands can be reconciled. They do so by promoting an industrial revolution based on clean energy. Hundreds of thousands of climate jobs will address the need for a transition away from dirty fossil fuels, modernizing our energy, transport, and urban infrastructures, and addressing the sluggishness of our labor market. And here's the challenging thing. If we just see a Green New Deal in strictly growth-oriented terms, seeing energy as a good that just has to be more cleanly produced, or work as a necessity that just has to be more fairly distributed and regulated, we're missing the way in which energy and work, conceived along these lines, have driven rampant inequality and exploitation at both domestic and global scales, while at the same time treating the rest of nature as a kind of perpetual tap you just turn on for resources, or as a sink where you chuck out your waste. And it's really important to underline that according to this vision, vast numbers of humans are treated as disposable waste as well. So my point is that our modern conceptions of capitalist energy and capitalist waste and capitalist labor need to be radically revised. We're facing a crossroads that goes well beyond the urgent necessity of bringing fossil fuel companies to heel, weaning ourselves off unsustainable energy practices. We need to be brave enough to explore alternatives to the status quo that challenge our reliance on what a fossil-fueled modernity encourages us to think are necessities of life. What might that mean? I'll just let that sit. But I want to conclude by suggesting that any truly sustainable future is going to involve at least four basic principles. The 4 Ds. Democratize, decarbonize, decommodify, and not least, develop your people power. What does that mean? Democratize not just our electoral politics, but our workplaces as well, because workers need to control the processes of their work. And decarbonize, but not just to replace one unsustainable source of energy with another, one extractivism for another. And decommodify because we need to take those necessities of a good life that we all recognize, including energy, but also shelter and health and education and transport, out of a market-based system. And then surely to achieve these things, we need to develop our people power as a genuinely alternative form of value to that of the market. And I think I would add a 5th one, which I haven't got here, maybe as or more crucial than all the rest, and that's decolonize. Because we really do need to decolonize our international system and indeed our relations to the earth itself. Well, that may sound utopian, but you know what? We need utopia now. In the science fiction classic, Woman on the Edge of Time by Marge Piercy, there are visitors from the future who explain their reasons for making contact with the present. And I want you to hear in these lines the future speaking to you. You may fail us. You individually may fail to understand us or to struggle in your own life and time. You of your time may fail to struggle altogether. But we must fight to come to exist, to remain in existence, to be the future that happens. That's why we reached you. Thanks.